What if I told you that the most famous engine battle of the 1960s was rigged from the start, and both manufacturers have been lying about the true winner for over 50 years? I'm talking about the legendary showdown between the Chevy 396 and Ford 390, two engines that were supposed to represent the ultimate displacement war, but actually masked one of the automotive industry's most shocking conspiracies. While General Motors pushed their 396 as the ultimate big block destroyer, and Ford marketed their 390 as the Blue Oval's answer to everything, behind closed doors, both companies were playing a numbers game so twisted that it would make Wall Street blush. The official horsepower ratings, the displacement figures, even the basic specifications you've read about for decades, it's all been carefully manipulated to hide a truth so devastating that it could rewrite muscle car history. By the end of this video, you'll understand why that seemingly innocent 6 cubic inch difference between these engines was actually a smokescreen for corporate deception on an industrial scale. You'll discover which engine really won this legendary battle, and more importantly, why both Ford and Chevrolet have spent over half a century making sure you never found out. This isn't just automotive history. This is the story of how two corporate giants conspired to fool an entire generation of gearheads and why they're still lying to you today. Welcome to 1965, the year that changed everything in the muscle car wars, when displacement became the ultimate weapon and corporate America went completely insane with power. This wasn't just competition anymore. This was automotive nuclear warfare, and General Motors and Ford were building engines like they were preparing for Armageddon. The battlefield was simple but brutal. Chevrolet had dominated the early 1960s with their legendary small blocks, but Ford was fighting back with everything they had. The stakes couldn't have been higher. Whoever controlled the muscle car market would control the hearts and wallets of an entire generation. Corporate executives were under massive pressure from shareholders, dealers, and most importantly, their own engineering teams who were building engines that defied every rule of physics and common sense. Enter the 396, Chevrolet's supposed answer to Ford's growing big block dominance. GM marketing pushed it as the perfect balance of power and reliability. The engine that could deliver big block performance in a package that wouldn't bankrupt you at the gas pump or the insurance office. They positioned it as the thinking man's muscle car engine, sophisticated enough for luxury applications, but brutal enough to dominate any stoplight challenge. But Ford wasn't backing down. The 390 FE had already proven itself as a legitimate threat, powering everything from family sedans to full-blown race cars. Ford's engineering team had spent years perfecting this beast, creating an engine that could deliver massive torque while maintaining the kind of reliability that built customer loyalty for life. The 390 was Ford's declaration of war against GM's small block empire. What neither company was telling the public was that both engines represented something far more sinister than simple competition. Corporate executives at both manufacturers knew they were sitting on technology that could embarrass engines costing twice as much. But they also knew that unleashing their full potential would destroy the delicate balance of power that kept both companies profitable. The displacement psychology was everything. In an era where cubic inches meant bragging rights, that 6 cubic inch difference between 396 and 390 seemed like a decisive advantage for Chevrolet. Buyers looked at those numbers and assumed bigger had to be better. GM marketing teams knew exactly what they were doing when they chose 396 as their magic number. It sounded massive compared to Ford's 390, even though the real story was far more complicated. But here's where the conspiracy begins to unravel. Internal documents that surfaced decades later revealed that neither manufacturer was being honest about what their engines could really do. The official ratings were carefully calculated to maintain competitive balance while keeping insurance companies and federal regulators from asking too many uncomfortable questions. Both Ford and Chevrolet knew they had built engines capable of embarrassing performance, but they also knew that admitting the truth would trigger a regulatory and financial nightmare that could destroy both companies. What happened next would expose the biggest lie in muscle car history. The numbers Ford and Chevrolet published were nothing short of a masterclass in corporate deception, and when you see the real specifications they buried, you'll understand why both companies were terrified of telling the truth. Let's start with what they wanted you to believe. Chevrolet claimed their 396 produced 375 horsepower in its hottest configuration, while Ford's 390 was rated at anywhere from 335 to 425 horsepower depending on the application. On paper, this looked like a clear victory for the 396. More displacement and competitive power in a supposedly more advanced package. But leaked internal documents tell a completely different story, one that both manufacturers spent millions trying to suppress. The truth starts with those displacement figures themselves. While everyone assumed 396 cubic inches was automatically superior to 390, Ford engineers had actually achieved something remarkable with their bore and stroke combination. The 390's 4.05-inch bore and 3.78-inch stroke created ideal breathing characteristics and perfect torque production, while Chevrolet's 396 used a 4.09-inch bore and 3.76-inch stroke that looked impressive on paper but created real-world problems they never wanted to discuss. Here's the smoking gun that changes everything. Internal dyno sheets from both manufacturers, leaked by former employees decades later, revealed that a properly tuned Ford 390 routinely produced over 450 horsepower at the flywheel, nearly 100 more than the official rating. Meanwhile, Chevrolet's vaunted 396 struggled to make its advertised 375 horsepower without carefully controlled conditions and cherry-picked test engines. The 390 wasn't just competitive with the 396, it was systematically destroying it in real-world performance. But the conspiracy goes even deeper. Ford's 390 featured forged steel crankshafts, heavy-duty connecting rods, and cylinder heads with port designs that wouldn't look out of place on a modern racing engine. The compression ratios were conservative at 10.5 to 1, but Ford engineers knew this was just the starting point for an engine designed to handle massive power increases. Internal memos revealed that Ford had tested 390 engines producing over 550 horsepower with basic modifications, numbers that would have embarrassed Chevrolet's entire big block lineup. Chevrolet's 396, meanwhile, was built with cost-cutting measures disguised as engineering advantages. The shorter stroke meant less torque production where it mattered most, and the cylinder heads, while adequate, couldn't match the breathing capability of Ford's sophisticated port designs. Most damning of all, General Motors had equipped most 396 engines with cast crankshafts and connecting rods that limited power potential, a fact they buried in technical service bulletins that never reached the public. The weight difference told the real story. While the 396 was supposed to be the more efficient package, it actually weighed nearly 50 pounds more than Ford's 390 when equipped with comparable accessories. Ford had achieved superior power-to-weight ratios while building an engine that could handle abuse that would destroy the competition. They had won the technical battle decisively, but something prevented them from claiming victory. That something was about to tear both companies apart. Here's where the story takes a dark turn that will make you question everything you thought you knew about the muscle car wars. Both Ford and General Motors were sitting on information that could have destroyed their competitor, but instead of using it, they made a calculated decision that would deceive enthusiasts for generations. The conspiracy started in the boardrooms of Detroit, where executives from both companies realized they had a mutual problem. Ford's 390 was systematically embarrassing Chevrolet's 396 in real-world testing, but admitting this publicly would trigger a horsepower war that neither company could afford to fight. Insurance companies were already circling like vultures, threatening to blacklist any manufacturer whose engines were deemed too dangerous for public roads. But the deception went far beyond simple numbers manipulation. Ford was ordered by their own executives to equip 390 engines with restrictive intake manifolds and conservative camshafts that deliberately limited performance. Meanwhile, Chevrolet's advertising department was given carte blanche to make outrageous claims about 396 performance that their engineers knew were impossible to achieve in production trim. The result was a systematic campaign of misinformation that convinced an entire generation of buyers that displacement automatically meant superiority. The insurance industry played a crucial role in this conspiracy. Companies like State Farm and Allstate had quietly informed both manufacturers that engines producing more than a certain horsepower per pound ratio would face automatic policy restrictions or outright coverage denial. This created a perverse incentive for both Ford and GM to hide their engines' true capabilities rather than face a public relations nightmare that could destroy their mainstream sales. Corporate espionage between the companies revealed just how deep the deception ran. GM had obtained detailed specifications for Ford's 390 through industrial spying, and they knew their 396 couldn't compete on a level playing field. Rather than admit defeat, GM executives made the shocking decision to spread disinformation about 390 reliability and performance characteristics. They planted stories in automotive magazines about supposed 390 weaknesses that were completely fabricated, while their own testing proved the Ford engine was actually superior in nearly every measurable category. Ford's response was equally corrupt. Rather than expose GM's deception, they chose to profit from it by selling deliberately detuned 390 engines while developing more powerful versions for their own executives and racing teams. They had built the superior engine, but decided to hide that fact from the very customers who were paying for it. The conspiracy worked perfectly. Too perfectly. NASCAR in the mid-1960s became the proving ground where corporate lies met high-speed reality. While Chevrolet's marketing department was busy promoting 396 victories in carefully selected events, Ford's 390 engines were quietly dominating tracks where the manufacturers had less control over the narrative. Internal racing division documents revealed that Ford 390-powered cars consistently outperformed their 396 competitors in head-to-head testing. But these results were systematically buried by both companies' public relations machines. Street racing legends from the era tell stories that completely contradict the official narrative. Unassuming Ford Galaxies and Fairlanes with 390 engines were consistently embarrassing 396-powered Chevelles and Camaros at stoplight Grands Prix across America. The 390's superior torque production and more efficient power delivery made it the ultimate sleeper weapon, but Ford's marketing department was too afraid of insurance repercussions to capitalize on these real-world victories. International racing circuits saw glimpses of what both engines could really do when unleashed from corporate restrictions. European teams that acquired these engines discovered that the 390 could be modified to produce significantly more power than the 396, with identical modifications. These victories were quietly celebrated by Ford's international division while being systematically ignored by American automotive media. The most damning evidence came from professional engine builders who worked with both power plants during the era. They consistently reported that 390 engines were more responsive to modifications, produced more reliable power, and lasted longer under racing conditions. But their testimonials were buried under an avalanche of corporate-sponsored content promoting the displacement advantage myth. The truth was hiding in plain sight, but both companies made sure you'd never see it. Until now. But this conspiracy goes deeper than just these two engines. Hit that subscribe button right now because next week, I'm exposing the real reason both Ford and GM killed their most powerful engines of the era, and the government pressure that made it happen. Ring that notification bell because the muscle car cover-ups we're about to reveal will shock you to your core.